Now I'll introduce the guest speakers before we start. So we have the director of the movie today, George Kurian. Can you stand up, please? He's right there. George Kurian, director of tonight's film, is a documentary filmmaker and photojournalist currently based in Beirut, who has lived and worked across North Africa and the Middle East. Next, we have Oula Hajjar. Can you stand up, please? Oula is a local community organizer and a member of the Montreal-based solidarity group Tadamun. Recently, she has worked directly supporting Syrian refugees in Berlin and Montreal. Third speaker of tonight, who's also going to perform in a bit, Yassin Alsalman. Can you stand up, please? Here. Yassin, better known by his stage name, The Narcissist, or Narcy, is an Iraqi-Canadian journalist, hip-hop MC, and dedicated activist, currently based in Montreal.
Well, for the last many years, I've been living in countries like Afghanistan, Egypt, traveling a lot into Syria, Iraq. And I've been seeing the war and conflict up close. And it's been a challenge of, how to tell this story in a climate of so much media fatigue. How do you tell this story of what people are going through without blood and gore and guns and bombs in the background? How do you, every war has caused refugees, right? And yet the war machine rolls on. So my challenge was really like, how am I going to highlight the story of our fellow human beings that are on the other side of this divide? This interventionist divide where there are countries that go to war quite enthusiastically, and there are other countries that keep paying the price for decades. So that thought was with me for a long time, and I was living in Cairo at this time when I met this incredible group of people. When I met them, I was like, okay, this is how I tell that story. I was living in Cairo at this time when I met this group. Actually, I met them because I'm interested in music, and I was trying to find an oud teacher, and I was led to Nabil. So we were having a few classes, and then when Nabil told me he was leaving, I decided to follow him. And then he introduced me to his group of friends with whom he was making the journey. And then I started shooting with them. So the whole time when we were in Cairo, the plan was that I would get on the boat with them. So we started talking to the smugglers to kind of let me on. The smugglers were, yeah, so this is how much it's going to cost you, et cetera, et cetera. But the smuggling operation is such a huge thing. This little boat that you saw in the film made the smugglers about $500,000. So it's a huge racket with politicians, Coast Guard, police, and all of them involved. So I'd driven with them all the way to Alexandria, and at the last minute, I was told I couldn't get on the boat because they didn't want a camera on. And then Rami stepped up and he said, listen, if you were willing to risk your life to tell our stories, I think it's my duty to film for you. Because on the boat itself, it's not smugglers who are sailing the boat, because then they would get arrested in Europe. So it's actually less for people who don't even have the money to pay the full board on these boats. In this case, often young Egyptian men, so people who pay half the fare, and then they get to clean the toilets and cook for everybody else. So so I worked with Rami in terms of what to shoot, how to shoot, every day, make a daily diary, the whole list of things to do. And he did an incredible job. So I flew to Sicily, waiting for them to land. And normally this trip takes about 2 to 3 days. But it was 5, 6, 7, 8 days gone, and no one had a clue about this set of people. And I went to the Coast Guard. I was going to every organization to try and find out if they had any information about this group. Nobody had any. But then I was told about this woman, Italian Syrian woman, who's found a way to make contact with ships on the open sea. So what she does is make contact with tankers and ships that are coming across, saying, hey, there's a boat of refugees coming up. You might meet them around here, pick them up, kind of thing. So she asked me for the names of the people I was following, so I gave them the full list of the people. And so she put it out on the seas. So that's why that scene when they, was that doubt, are you going to Italy or not? Because the tanker that picks them up was actually headed for Genoa from Singapore. So because it was in a different direction, they were really scared not to get on the wrong boat and be taken back. And then finally the captain on the boat calls out their names because he'd been given these names. And that's when they get on the boat and, the journey continued. And I followed them from Italy into the various camps they went to live in, lived with them undercover, documenting their lives there. And that's how the film came about. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Fundamentalism is a huge, big problem, not just in the Middle East, but I guess in the USA as well, and all around us. So, but that being said, I think we should also look at what brings fundamentalism about. Take Afghanistan for an example. When you look at Afghanistan in the 60s or the 50s. 50% of the women, of the teachers in Kabul were women. 50% of the bureaucrats were women. 50% of the doctors were women. And we're talking about the 60s, right? So what is it that then leads to a situation which leads to fundamentalism and the way women are treated in Afghanistan today? And I think that is a question that we really need to get behind, right? And interventionist politics, right, has caused so much strife. And fundamentalism is actually a byproduct of that. Without the war in Iraq, would ISIS even exist, or would they be such a strong force? This is a very real question that we should all be pondering. But the Iraq war is already ancient history now to most of us. So yes, fundamentalism is a problem. But yeah, I wanted to look at the people. And that's why the film. The first thing about Egypt, with the fall of the Mubarak regime and the rise of Sisi, the civil structures in Egypt kind of fell apart, and Syrians were one of the most vulnerable groups. To give you a few examples of what I'd heard while I was living there, and I'm talking about first-hand experience from people who lived there, that Syrians would go and try and rent a house, and often they'd be asked to pay 10 months rent up front. And a couple of months into their lease, they would be asked to leave with none of their money being returned. This was just one thing. Or cops routinely holding Syrians up, wanting to ask for identity cards, but then taking their phones off them, taking their money off them. This was routine. And your question about the police raids in Alexandria, this is something, Europe is very keen that the Egyptian borders are policed, and I think even pays in to help Egypt man their coast. But it is a very hard thing to do. The number of people fleeing makes it very difficult for people to kind of police their borders to any degree of efficiency that would satisfy Europe. But that being said, one of the reasons that Afaf and her son were arrested and kept in jail for two weeks is that the Egyptians have to show they're doing their jobs. And so the jails in Alexandria are just spilling with people who've been arrested. Fleeing war is not a crime, right? We all have the right to asylum if you are running for your life. But what they're arrested for is illegal migration, as they call it, like the fact that you don't have a visa when you to travel to another country. So the police often do these raids, and So quite often, the smugglers and the cops are in league. So quite often, it's the families with little children that are arrested, because most of the young people pay one person per board, but the families just pay for the adults. So even at that level, the families then become the most vulnerable. So the families are held back, sometimes kept for 2 weeks. So the jails in Alexandria look full with people, so the Egyptian cops look like they're doing their job. So this is an ongoing racket. And your question about why it wasn't filmed, because it was a very panicky moment with cops and guns, and they didn't pull out their cameras at that time, and therefore there was no footage of it.
A lot of people don't have the option to remain in the country that they live in, so I don't think they left for any specific reason but to, in hopes, as our parents did in the 80s and the 70s, in hopes of finding a better place to live. But obviously it's never Disneyland, So I don't know what they were looking for. I don't think you would know either, right?
I mean, again, it's like different people wanted different things. And the information for people making this kind of journey comes through a grapevine. And quite often it's not well researched in terms of where we're going to go, why. And the rules in Europe keep changing. So quite often it's on the hoof. They make a decision that, okay, this is where I'm going to go, or this is where it's easier. So these decisions are made more out of what they think is going to be the easiest way, to get a normal life. Nothing else?
Yeah, I'd like to add that often there is a lot of oversimplification of this topic, especially that with the information we get from the media. They show refugees as that they're kind of picky, they want to go somewhere specific, but the truth is not. It's much more complicated than this. There are things that people usually consider, like people look at the European Union and they say, oh, it's like harmonized, like all the countries are basically the same, but that's not the truth. Like the likability of acceptance of refugees changes from country to another, and this is a very important element to consider. The numbers of people getting rejected in Greece, for example, is much higher than other countries, than Sweden, for example. So if you tell me, and I'm escaping war, that, oh, you're in Greece, so you're safe, you should stay here, and I know there's a higher chance of me going back, deported back to danger, of course I would go somewhere where there's a higher chance of me being safe, right? So there are many topics, there's a lot of oversimplification for sure in the media, and this is, I feel like we all get that in the media, and we just repeat it all the time, and people start thinking that it's true, but it's not.
Yeah, I can share shortly. I was really, like, by coincidence in Berlin, Germany during summer 2015, and this summer was called the Summer of Refugees. It was like when Germany decided to open the borders to, like, welcome refugees, and I saw it actually, it's that the Syrian refugees themselves that decided to break European borders. Like, like Europe was just talking from far about, like, what's happening in the Middle East. Europe was selling arms to the Middle East. Europe was, like, just like always the subject of the Middle East, but like they never decided, like, on their own to open the frontiers to host refugees. So until the Syrians themselves really, like, decided just to take the sea, take the land, and, like, with courage, and just decide, like, yeah, we need more places to stay. And yes, they were in Lebanon, they were in Egypt, they were in Jordan, and these countries hosted them, but there were definitely a lot of problems, a lot of racism, a lot of lack of infrastructure, a lot of lack of help, even though, like, these countries host tons of NGOs with European money being funded, with European staff, with high administrative costs being in the Middle East, trying to help refugees. And, like, while these staff are just, partying and, like, not doing really, like, the main jobs, not, like, being able to give these refugees, like, the decent life, like, some people that were dying in tents under the cold. So these people, that's why they decided to leave, because they were really dying, they were suffering. They came from one death until another death and decided, anyway, the death is haunting us. Wherever we go, we're gonna try and maybe another way to escape from this death. And they just decided to take the courage, take the sea, and get to Europe. So Germany, not because it's like a country that was doing really the nice thing and decided to open borders. They did their calculation and they showed actually that German economy was actually way better after the refugees came. They were lacking youth that used to need to work. Though some villages in Germany were closing down because there's no children. They needed these people. They needed these high professional skilled Syrians that are really hardworking people. They gave them, access to come, and certainly they didn't give them residency. It's they gave them little, asylum seeker for temporary period. And just yesterday, Merkel decided to deport actually 100,000 refugees because it's politics. There's geopolitical agenda. Not everything is. So I can talk a lot, but also. Canada is the same. Canada, decided to just take advantage of the election and do electoral promises. And Justin Trudeau promised, and his, the first thing I will do, I would host 25,000 refugees. And what's 25,000 refugees? It's not even 0.4% of all the whole number of refugees, Syrian refugees worldwide. And it's really most of these refugees are people that have parents, family, uncles, cousins that live here. They have the right to come here. And these people had really files that were pending for years and years, and they were requesting to come to Canada, and these requests were always refused. And now and there's a high cost actually to come here. It's not they just open the door for them. And there's tons to talk about, but it's it's always important to be critical and to know where our money goes, because we pay taxes, and our taxes, Canada last year was the second largest exporter of arms to the Middle East after the US. So we have to be critical about these things.
I mean, it was a group of 12 people that made the journey, and I was kind of following them all, documenting all their stories and all of that. And then as we started editing, then a kind of narrative fell into place. And that became the film. That's the short answer. I guess, at the time that I was making it, a big running theme with the refugee crisis was once they've made it to Europe, it's life happily ever after. This seemed to be the running thread in most of the stories in the media. And the fact that once they reach Europe, that's just one part of it. And then there is this very Kafkaesque existence, sometimes for the rest of their lives, right? And to touch upon this in a way that says, these, and also at that time there was a lot of terms like, what was it? It was not gold diggers. It was another one of these terms that kept suggesting that these are people migrating for money or things like that. So it just felt very important to me to kind of show what is actually happening with it. When any of us are asked who we are, one of the first or second lines that we would spout is, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a journalist, I'm an artist, I'm a musician. But then when that's taken away from you with absolutely no choice of your own, and you're looking at a whole lifetime, sometimes without even a language to express yourself in, like Angela, she's an amazing journalist, and people in the Arab world would tell me how good her Arabic was. But now she's struggling in Belgium with pidgin Flemish, as it were. But she's a fighter. She's hasn't given up hope. She's really trying to make it again as a journalist. But then there's that great sense of loss that you just have to keep within yourself and move on. And I thought this part of what it is to be a refugee was very important to highlight. So that took center stage in the film.
I think the main intersection that always not interests me, but I think is very crucial is the nuances of people's life, the day-to-day. The humanity in the people that are being reported on, which we don't really get. You don't get names. You just get numbers and passing photos and then boats, and then they move on. So with the arts, I also have the responsibility of being aware of my privilege and my position that I'm in, but also the platform that I have and using it in a way to at least point fingers in a direction where people can get information or can experience those one-to-one experiences. So with the collective, our main goal, I think, overall is to develop our own narratives around internationality, because many of us in our generations, in our history of our family, have been affected by borders one way or another. And this story is ever expanding in the world. It's not like it's getting better. It's actually, the situations are getting more dire and more people are leaving, and this shift and, massive shift of human weight is going left and right. So, in the long run, we just hope to be able to set up a platform for youth from where we're from. I'm specifically from Iraq. But one of the most poignant points in the movie was when he went to that Christmas party and he noticed the racism that was internal to the new society that they were in. And I think the experience of the Arab or the experience of the Muslim or whatever you want to call it, we become very aware of other experiences that are similar, that came before us and are happening at the same time with us. So that's internationality, that commonality in struggle, that commonality in identity is what we're hoping to achieve with the arts and with our collective. And I think it's just one way of countering a wave of information that is being controlled for us,
If there are any more questions, please catch me outside, and we'll be here to answer them. And thank you all for coming. Wow.
I'd like to just thank Cinema Politica for the work that they do and for continuously doing this and spreading, individual experiences through film. I think we're a very visual culture, and it's very important to keep doing what they're doing. And to thank George, obviously, for sharing this story with the world and, being selfless with the process and allowing the people themselves to control the process and tell us the story from their direct experience. So thank you, man.
Yeah, I'd like as well to thank Cinema Politica for inviting me. Just also it's always nice to hear from Syrian people themselves. There's a lot of Syrian people in the city, just like there's always language barrier, but there's always find a way to communicate and through translator just talk to them, see their opinion, what they think, why they're here, what they want. It's important to interact with them yourself.